I'm Ian Sigmon. I'm a software developer here at LabKey, and I will be talking about how to set up and use the script-based pipelines. So just a quick overview, we're going to talk about kind of a little bit of history of where they came from, and then get into how to implement them, and then a few kind of quick examples on how to do on what they look like. So as an overview, so our data pipeline has been in LabKey for quite a while. It typically runs a set of tasks that are used for processing data or pre-processing data before you kind of import it into LabKey. They are run in the background and on the server. One of the key features is the logging, which can then be, as the things are processed, these logs can be reviewed and be confirmed to be operating in a good fashion. We can also have notifications in case there's errors or kind of issues with the processing. And they're all kind of centralized on the job pipeline grid. So you can see whether they were successful, what's running, any issues, or even cancel them if you are so inclined. Typically these are built in using Java code. Most of these tasks exist on the modules and are within the actual deployed module code. And so there's lots of examples of these within the flow module. There's MS2 and a few others as well. Our archive imports all operate kind of under this, through this pipeline framework. So those. So the script pipelines that we're going to talk about today operate using that same kind of base pipeline, and however they allow the development of these and easier deployment of pipelines even from our file-based modules. So they leverage the just some naming conventions and some other things to help kind of simplify the workflows and provide. So using the pipelines, it can simplify the workflows and help reduce errors and provide some consistency. We can provide inputs and outputs, and can be, as well as we can use different scripts, different scripting languages to allow some flexibility on what you're comfortable with, and generally make it easier to use. So let's actually, there we go. So let's talk about what they actually look like and how we actually develop these. So within our file-based modules, we have kind of a set of naming conventions and location conventions that allow us to kind of, where the system knows where to look for these things and can identify them and then deploy them in so that we can actually use them. It's all about kind of the layout. So as you can see here, there's within the module, from the module root, you place them in the resources and the pipeline directory. The script pipelines consist typically of 3 files, or one to define what the pipeline and the tasks that are involved, a file for each to define what the task looks like, and then a script file to actually execute as part of the task. And so as you can see, they're placed in kind of 2 sibling directories. One is the list of pipelines, for the set of pipeline file XML files. And then another sibling directory is the tasks, which consists of the task definition file and all the scripts that would be used within those tasks. So taking a closer look at the pipeline definition, it's a fairly simple XML file. It defines some metadata like a description and a name, as well as some and then the important part is the set of tasks that the pipeline will execute. These can be, as we mentioned, the ones that are in the task folder, or they can also be the pre-existing built-in file or tasks that are already existing in the system in other modules. So as long as those modules are enabled on the folder that is going to be operating the pipeline task or the pipeline job, then we can reference those kind of directly as well by using either the full Java path or kind of the task name, the class name itself. So let's go on to the task definition. Again, it defines a lot of some of the metadata, like the task name and description. But the important bit is either the script file or the scripts block, which defines a script file that we're going to execute, or an execution block where we can actually execute the command line, an inline version of the script that's going to be provided. And within this file, we also have the option to define some parameters, as well as the inputs and outputs, if we're going to be generating those. And so, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about what those inputs and outputs can look like. They're basically the files that it's the input file that we're going to be taking in for the task. And the important part here is not so much the full name of the file versus the actual file extension. And so the file extension is how we associate, or how the LabKey associates a pipeline to kind of the initial input file that it will execute on. So as we'll see in a little bit, when we look at how they're run, we'll see that the file extension is where we actually look up that, where we actually associate, we can find the pipeline to execute. And there's quite a few things that we can control here, and as far as parameters and things like that. And as you've likely seen as you've used LabKey, we can use the $curly substitution syntax. There's quite a few options of things that we can use as parameters. So how this works is we read in the script file or the script command that's part of the task, and then we actually substitute in the values that are provided directly into a copy of the script. And so here's kind of a list of the various things that various parameters that we do support. This isn't quite a full list. However, but this is a good kind of example of what common things that we've used or that can be used. So you can reference so if your script needs to query the server, or you can provide the server name, the server URL, as well as an API key or something that to enable that kind of query access. So if you need some metadata or something from a different server as part of your script, you can pull that data within your script. So let's talk about how we actually execute these guys. The most common way is via the file browser. So once you drop in your data file into the file system, into the file browser, you can select the target file that you want to use. And then by clicking the import data, you can see the set of pipeline jobs that can be executed on that file. And so these are all matched based on the file extension. And so you can see the new jobs and the various jobs that you can then execute. Once you select the job you want to do, you'll be shown, you can see a parameter dialog or a job dialog. This allows you to set any parameters and things that you want to set, that you need to set for your scripts or your tasks. These will be provided, these are added to each script and can be executed or applied at execution. Another way to do this is within the pipeline XML, you can actually define a URL and a view that you can then collect all the parameters and things that you need for your pipeline. And then within that page, you can launch it using either the JavaScript wrapper API or call the pipeline launcher, the start analysis API as well directly. So this is kind of a similar thing. So the other way is to directly execute this through by invoking the analysis API. And so again, this can be done through either via the JavaScript wrapper objects or client APIs that we have, as well. However, some of the other languages or clients that we have don't currently have the wrapper directly, but you can directly hit the pipeline analysis start analysis API directly with a post for all of the parameters, with all the parameters that you need to execute. And then one of my favorite ways to do this, to execute these, is using the file watcher. If you've got a premium subscription, then I believe you can use these. And what they do is they'll watch a location, and as the appropriate files are dropped, it'll execute the selected pipeline task. And so when we've defined our pipelines before, they'll show up here in this list and allow us to execute through there. And then within this dialog, there's another section where you can provide any parameters that would otherwise be necessary. All right, so some quick example kind of use cases here that we've run into. So we had a specimen export, some inventory stuff that was provided via CSV. This was picked up by our file watcher, which executed our Python pipeline that uses some Python tasks. This does some normalization on the data, and then imports the raw data to one section for an archive, and then splits it up and sets it to the various studied containers and tasks where it's going to be used. These can then pick that data up separately and trigger their own file watchers as well. So one of the kind of interesting part of this one was it was actually using the API, the Python API, to get some metadata from the server as well to integrate that in with the data that was being added. Yeah, and then for this was an we can do the assay imports. Again, it's pretty much just doing some pre-processing and reading the file and parsing it using R. We can then tack on some of the metadata for the assay and include it into get some batch information, or get some different data that's related to that's already in the system, and then include this and then import that data as we need to. And then this one actually, if it fails, it puts it into a different folder, which is then allowing the user to come in and apply some corrections if as necessary. Yeah, so with that, I think that's most of the talk. So if there's any questions, Steve?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ian, for that. Yeah, one question here is, before we can, one of the users asks, before we can use the pipeline, do we need to load the pipeline as modules? And I think the idea is like, do we need to deploy them within a module? Is I think the intent of the question.
This is Carl. If the question is about a user's custom script-based pipeline, yes, you have to deploy it. If the module that implements the script pipeline must be deployed. Not only deployed, but it must be enabled in the folder. Yeah. Otherwise, depending on how you plan to execute the pipeline, whether it's via the file browser or via a Firewatcher, that module must, be deployed and enabled. The other subtlety here is, say if you have, depending on if you have a script and you plan to either use Perl, Python, or R, the other thing that you need to keep in mind is you need to configure a script engine for that, because that's the sort of the execution mechanism that we use. So, for example, in either the two scenarios we had, in one case we had a Python-based pipeline. You have to define a Python script engine that knows how to run .py files, and for the second, the R-based pipeline, by the same token, you need an R, script engine configured.
Great, thank you. And another audience question here: is this different from the run in background pipeline from the R window?
Yes. The run is a background job. So what he's referring to, there's a checkbox in the script editor for R, or for any scripts that say either run it in the foreground or run it in the background. They are similar in that they are run in the pipeline, as part of in the first few slides we described, that this leverages the existing pipeline framework, which runs asynchronously, has logging, email notifications. So yeah, the common thread is that they are both run as a pipeline job, but you can't, if you have an R-based report, in essence, it's not necessarily a script-based pipeline. It's just how we execute the report.
Yeah, great. And a third question from the audience here: any support or plan to support popular workflow pipeline systems like WDL or Nextflow? We have some data processing pipelines already made, and it would be great if we do not have to translate them.
Not that I have heard of. I'm not familiar with those workflow engines. We can, if Adam, our VP of product strategy, is on, he can kind of file it away as something that we could consider in the future. But I haven't really heard. I'm not familiar with that kind of request. There is currently nothing on our list to support those.
Carl, can you wrap those like with, Python or something so that you could, set up your, your external workflow engine and then use, Python or another scripting language as a shim between LabKey and that external process?
I guess, sure, theoretically, like if those are invocable from a scripting language, yeah, I could see. Yeah, do you know anything about them, Matt?
No, not a lot.
Yeah, but sure, if it can be invoked from, say like Python or R, then, you could maybe build a script-based pipeline that basically executed this external tool.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, and another one. Well, it's interesting. A user asks, any future plans to integrate a Jupyter interface?
That's interesting because we are doing some work for Jupyter kind of mostly through the reporting mechanism. But yeah, I kind of love to hear. I'm sure others would love to hear what that would look like.
Any other questions out there? Well, also, I know some of the developers here have worked on, we're working with Jupyter right now. Care to give us a little preview of what you do have coming out?
Yeah, Matt, you want to?
Oh, yeah, handing the potato. Okay. Yeah, we are working on our first iteration on supporting Jupyter. We are not, just to tamp down expectations, we are not hosting yet. Maybe in the future if there's demand. We're not hosting the Jupyter interactive editor, but we are implementing the ability to take a Jupyter notebook and run it as a report, very much like you would run a knitter report, using the R reporting engine. And that, at least, I don't know if we'll call it final or experimental in 22.7, but it is coming out very shortly, that in a way that you should be able to experiment with.